Well, no, and if I remember that interview, I said that's never going to,
Yeah.
you just, that people keep thinking that, and it gets worse and worse and worse, and it's just a really dumb way to look at things. Maybe we're at that moment now. It took a long time. I mean, not that people haven't voted for Democrats, but point of that was more that, if things get bad enough, I don't know, then maybe we'll get universal health care or something like that, and maybe we're on the brink of it. Maybe things are that bad now. I don't know.
There's always a slight kind of course correction every time this happens. I mean, there's a reason why it pretty much alternates between Republicans and Democrats in the main office, but it's hard to imagine things being as fractured as they are now that there's ever going to be any kind of really sort of unified force behind a candidate,
right,
in the way that there had been in the past.
Right.
One of the things I was wondering, having read that interview, was, in the, I guess, almost 25 years since 1994 at this point, when you look back on that time, whether you feel that your politics or point of view have radically changed.
I don't actually think they have. I think I've been agitating for a lot of the same things, single-payer health care, gun control, these sorts of issues, really for all that time. And on some of that, I feel like maybe it's a reaction to Trump, maybe people are just fed up, but the younger voters, the Democratic Socialists, that movement that's coming along, people are really starting to view these things as possibilities that could happen in a way that they just didn't 25 years ago.
I mean, it feels like there's always some sort of, undercurrent happening, but do you feel like it is radically different from that standpoint, that people are taking it seriously in ways that they hadn't in previous, years or decades?
I think there was a sort of centrist, democratic, conventional wisdom point of view that kind of ruled the debate for a long time, and a lot of ideas were just outside the parameters of the debate. And I think there's this generation of young voters coming up saying, well, we don't agree with your self-imposed limitations on this. We want a better society.
I mean, that's going to continue to be the struggle, given the way politics have worked out and are shaped here, especially with what is ostensibly a two-party system, right? I mean, invariably, it seems you're always going to have to sort of choose between going off on your own and getting the feeling that you're kind of throwing your vote away, or going centrist, or picking the lesser.
Or maybe the Democratic Party is genuinely going to be pushed to the left. I mean, maybe ideas like a universal basic income will be taken seriously finally.
Does that feel like could actually be happening? We still have the same structures in place that we have, and the DNC certainly feels pretty much the same as it has before.
Yeah, but don't you think... I mean, I feel like they were profoundly shaken by Ocasio-Cortez's victory. I've been hanging out with a kind of younger crowd since I came to New York, and there's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of a sense that you could really change the world.
It did feel like this crazy, unbelievable thing that had happened. And I mean, the victories that Bernie Sanders had early on also felt like that to some degree.
Yeah, definitely.
And it felt like, for a while at least, it felt like there was a chance that he'd go all the way. But I just, I've heard people firmly entrenched in the Obama camp and firmly entrenched in Hillary's camp, essentially say that, oh, well, the lesson in all this is that we need to recruit more people on the right, that it's the same lesson that they've taken away.
Well, and that is the wrong lesson. That I hope that people will understand that is the wrong lesson. If this era has taught us anything, there are a lot of unpersuadable voters. You don't win them over, you defeat them.
Has comics been a way to agitate for you?
I think that's basically what I've been doing for however long it's been. My God.
So you were pretty much political on the page from the outset? I
started doing this because I loved comics, and it had the very, very early stuff had a sort of tangential political commentary aspect to it. And the first Gulf War was what made me realize that I was a political cartoonist, because I was marching in the street and very angry about things, and I suddenly realized I had a space in newspapers. I had a platform that I ought to be using for this. It wasn't as if I was doing Garfield one day and then suddenly doing political commentary the next, but it did reorient how I approached the work.
There wasn't a seismic shift. It was kind of gradually started seeping in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of took it over during the Gulf War.
At the time that you started, was there an absence of that kind of progressive voice in daily or weekly political cartoons?
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of the second wave of the alt-weekly cartoonists. First you had Matt Groening, Linda Barry, Charles Burns.
And Matt Groening was always a little political.
But not
Yeah.
Not 100%
Not overtly so, yeah.
political. The film director David Lynch had a strip in those days called The Angriest Dog in the World. It was literally the same 3 panels every time, with a word balloon coming out of the window that was usually saying something very enigmatic.
That doesn't sound like the David Lynch I know. Things sure have changed in David Lynch land.
There's a very old cartoon of mine that's in the big 25-year compilation that I put out a couple of years ago that makes fun of that comic, but I think really it's a deep cut. There was a sort of second wave of cartoonists that came along, and I was part of that. And even at that moment, in retrospect, it was exactly the right moment. The papers were still looking for something to fill their space, something to get readers back to read the classifieds, whatever. I was able to start running in a lot of those papers very quickly. It kind of, once it took off, it really took off. In terms of this all-weekly political cartooning, I was certainly one of the pioneers of that.
That particular strip didn't start off being political. It was already in papers by the time you made that shift?
Yeah, but it was in some papers, and then once it became more political, that appeared to be what editors wanted, because then I went from like 10 papers to a couple hundred in a very short period of time.
I was going to ask if there was any sort of pushback. Obviously these papers didn't sign up for a political strip, and that it became political.
Not that I recall.
Again, this is coming from somebody who wasn't like particularly conscious of what was happening as the Gulf War was happening, but at least in hindsight, it doesn't seem like it was a particularly popular war.
The first Gulf War was not. No. Let me go back and rephrase that. Like all of these wars, it had a lot of support among the general public, among the news media.
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing I was writing about. So in my bubble, it was not a popular war, I should say.
It's an easier target, for example, than a war that we start because the largest attack on American soil had ever happened.
That was a lonelier moment to be doing the work I do, because that had enormous support even among liberals. There were people who then later became very prominent critics of the Bush administration who initially supported the Afghanistan war, for instance.
Were you in New York during 9/11?
I was. I stood on the rooftop of my building in Brooklyn and literally watched the towers collapse.
So once you've internalized what's happening, and at some point you do have to get back to the strip, you must be pretty trepidatious when you do approach the topic or sort of get back into political commentary at that time.
I mean, that's an extreme example. I mean, I have to sort of figure out what's happening and what I want to say about it every single week. That was just a very extreme example of that. But it was really clear really, really quickly that we were about to head into a period of stupid jingoism, that we were really about to go off the rails. So it was not that difficult. The difficult thing was, this was pre-social media, but I had a blog and email and all of that, and I got a lot of negative pushback on my work, and especially those first couple of months right after 9/11.
I think it's pretty much universally accepted that The Onion had a smart and good approach to it afterwards. When something like that happens, what was your approach at the time?
Boy, I should have reread some of my own work to prepare for this. I have the worst memory for it, but I
that must have been a pretty defining moment for you.
I started retaliating, starting the war in Afghanistan. This all came in very quickly.
Yeah.
And I was writing about how this could all go terribly wrong, and we needed to be really careful. I don't have the work here in front of me, but I have gone through it in the past couple of years because I put together this big Kickstarter compilation a few years ago. This was all obvious, and I was not the only person saying it. There were millions of people protesting in the streets around the world. But a lot of what I wrote basically turned out to be true. Like, people were saying, "Oh, this will be easy. It'll be a cakewalk. Remember all that? They're gonna, we'll be in and out.
WMDs
It'll be very cheap and easy." And I was kind of the guy in the back of the classroom with my hand raised, saying, "I do not know if this is true."
Yeah.
And also, then you immediately had a lot of racial profiling. You had a lot of negative stuff that really blew up right away. So there was plenty to write about.
What impact has social media had on you and your work?
Good and bad. A torrent of feedback can be an exhausting thing. And I don't actually engage with Facebook very much. I have a Facebook page that somebody else post cartoons. I actually don't even know what's on it, but I'm on Twitter all the time, and I like it. I mean, it's a constant source. It's a self-curated, constant source of information and insight. I have made a lot of friends that are now real life friends as a result of being on Twitter and getting to know people there. So, it can be a hellhole. It can be exhausting. And there's always that mob attack thing that happens. But overall, if you'd asked me this 2 or 3 years ago, I might have had an entirely different answer. But overall, I have found it to be very useful and in many ways a positive force in my life and in my work.
Moving to the internet as a platform, obviously that's going to drastically change your audience and your reach.
Well, yes and no, because and this is the thing I've noticed since I moved back to New York. When I lived here in 2000, I was running in the Village Voice. Everyone in a certain demographic read that paper. I never had to explain who I was. Online, you're competing with everything. You're competing with, the Colbert Show and all the writers. And I actually should say one of my friends is a writer for Colbert, and I'm not disrespecting this. But
you're competing with, in some cases, some very good things.
You're competing with very good things. Yeah. You're competing with, places that have staffs of writers, tons of people all putting together their best ideas. So it's like before this was so big, there was more room in kind of the margins. There was more room to be well known at a lower level. And now it feels like everything is competing with the biggest thing on the internet at all times. And it's much harder. I think, I guess my reach is broader but shallower, it feels like.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I was getting at, is that, you expect a certain, not homogenous, but you expect a certain audience from people who are picking up like alternative weeklies, for example.
Right. And
especially again, for the most part, the alternative weeklies that decide to pick you up, right? They know who their readerships are.
Right.
So, to a certain degree, you anticipate that people who are going to kind of come across this organically in print are people who are going to be, relatively like-minded.
Simpatico.
Yeah, exactly. That's what changes when you go online, right? Is that the people who share things aren't always sharing things because they think it's good or saying, hey, check this thing out that I agree with.
Yeah, I mean, often they are. Sometimes they're not. But yeah, no, it's you're reaching a broader audience. You're reaching often an audience that, I may be writing about something that feels like a basic understood fact in the world, and you're reaching an audience that there will be someone that it's the first time they've ever heard this idea and they can't believe that you're talking about it, things like that.
Does that impact the strip or the way you do it?
No, I that sort of thing I just ignore. I think the struggle is to try to figure out, because when you're online a lot, when you're on social media a lot, you have to keep in mind that not everyone is. Journalists and cartoonists. This is a lot of what we're doing, but that's its own bubble. So something that may just be the most popular joke or reference on Twitter any given week. You always have to try to figure out, can I reference this? Is anyone outside of this bubble going to understand what I'm talking about? How much do I have to explain it? More and more people generally tend to understand these things. They will bubble up from Twitter and then work their way into the real world. I mean, we have our president is an internet troll right now, so people are paying more attention.
He's basically a Gamergate character.
No, he totally is. I mean, it would not surprise me if he was, on 4chan under some
just
shitposting under some
Don
alias.
Jr. is. I mean, you've seen Don Jr.'s Instagram. No, you know that he's on message boards shitposting all the time.
But that stuff has now Gamergate. People didn't take Gamergate seriously, but now we have a Gamergate president. I have a friend named Anna Merlin who wrote an article about this a few years ago. Just, people choosing someone to dox and then sending 1,000 pizzas or whatever. Or swatting, for instance, where they will call in, a hostage crisis, and people can, and there's an example right there. I say swatting, and I'm thinking, do people? But that's a common term now, right?
Well, everyone, I can guarantee you, everybody
everyone
listening to this will know.
But I mean, that's the sort of thing I have to think about when I'm writing in the cartoon. If I throw out the term swatting, is that going to be understood widely?
I mean, the flip side of that, though, is that everybody has Google,
yes,
so everybody
of course.
can cross-reference.
And yet, you would be amazed at how often people write me asking to explain something when, there used to be this great website.
You said I would be amazed, Tom, you said I would be amazed, but as somebody who works for TechCrunch and whose handle is connected to every story that I write, it's clear to me that 99% of the people just read the headlines.
There used to be a website called Here, Let Me Google That for you, and you could send someone a link. That's kind of a smart-ass thing to do.
Sure.
But anyway, so this article that this friend of mine wrote about doxing and all of that, local police departments didn't understand it a few years ago. They didn't. They would say things like, well, just turn off the internet. We can't turn off the internet. It is the primary communications network of the.
Why would you take nude pictures if you don't want them on the internet?
No, and I hope more and more people are starting to recognize that the internet is just where human beings interact. It's not some magic. It's not some video game. It's not some magical fantasy land that has no relevance to the real world. It is arguably why Donald Trump is president.
The fact that everybody has a platform, the fact that everybody is, a comedian, and the fact that we have a president who is on an abstract level very funny, that they're very, you know what I mean? Again, like, let me clarify by saying, taking out any sort of like real world ramifications is just an absurd character.
Right.
Does that make you up your game? I mean, this was the whole thing, right? The whole debate about him coming in, about whether it was going to be a boon for comedians, but the fact of the matter is, like, nobody wants to read you making a joke about his weave.
So satire is the art of taking things to the most absurd extreme in order to make a point. And the problem for cartoonists and comedians is that we are living in the most absurd extreme. It is really hard to come up with a ridiculous scenario
every day
that is more absurd than what happens every day. So that's the constant challenge. He is an anti-boon for humorists. It was much easier and much more interesting for me during the Obama administration. I had many critiques from the left of what Obama was doing. I had critiques of the drone war, the kill list. I had critiques of the surveillance state. These were interesting things to write about, and they were provocative and challenging things to write about. In this era, I don't know. Everyone knows Trump is an idiot. Yeah. Everyone knows that everything he's doing is insane. It's just very hard to find a space where there's anything interesting to write about that's just not self-evident. It's just the overload of it is exhausting. It's like you're in a restaurant, you ask for a glass of water, and they bring out a fire hose and blast you in the face. It's too much.
One of the many upsides of having an Obama in office versus having a Trump in office, from I suspect your standpoint, is the fact that I would be concerned that, again, the things being as siloed as they are, and even prior to that, everything being ear stripping and, like, as you said, sort of simpatico papers, is that perhaps you worry about preaching to the choir too much or being a part of an echo chamber, but you're providing a valuable service when you're critiquing a Democrat from the left. I mean, because you're speaking to those people who, let's be honest, Obama was worshipped by a lot of people, and in some cases,
a lot of people got very mad at me every week for the things that I wrote in those days, but I felt that it was an important thing. I felt they were important things to write about.
I recently spoke to actually Matt Groening about this, who I think ended his strip in like 2012, and he told me that after 36 years or however long he had been doing Life in Hell, that he ended up doing, like, he would wake up the morning it was due and start working on it.
I would not want to do that. I like to take, and because I have the luxury of a weekly deadline, although it's a blessing and a curse, because keeping up with a news cycle that changes literally hourly has become very exhausting. I used to be able to, my cartoon goes live online on Monday mornings. I used to be able to work on something the week before, file it by Thursday or Friday.
Like, this is clearly going to be the big
news.
This
is clearly the thing I'm writing about, and unless there's some huge news event that changed things, and that happened occasionally, but not on a regular basis. I knew I was good. I could knock off. I could take off a 3-day weekend, or I could spend the rest of the week taking care of business things. I run all my own business stuff too. And I never really can quite set it aside anymore. What I had to come to terms with was just the fact that I'm a cartoonist. I'm not a news service. Mm-hmm. And if the cartoon is about something that people were talking about, we're living in dog years right now. You can write about something at the beginning of the week that seems like the most important topic. I did a cartoon about the nomination of Kavanaugh. Yeah. And by the time it ran, we were on to something else. It might have been the children at the border. I'm blanking right now, but it had just been forgotten by the time it ran. It was insane. And that happens easily half the time, if not more.
That happens on a much larger degree with doing the show. I'm lucky in that I've done enough of these that I've got a number of them banked. But mm-hmm. I was going back and editing an interview with Kevin Allison of The State, and he was talking about the children being separated at the border, and I was like, this is going to date this mm-hmm. in a way that it wouldn't before, because I don't know, this is the low bar.
It's insane how quickly we move on. I mean, we were talking about the president paying off his
which one?
Porn actor, right? Which one? Puerto Rico is still in crisis. Flint, Michigan, still doesn't have drinking water. Yeah. We have 1,000 things going on at any given moment, and it's like our brains can't keep all these thoughts in our heads at the same time, and so these things just get shunted aside.
Ultimately, in your opinion, what is the role of satire?
Okay, so I'm pausing.
It wouldn't be a good question if you could.
No, I mean, I've had to. I'm reconsidering it a bit, because one answer I would have for that is that it's not about persuasion so much as about.
You're not trying to change minds.
Well, let me get back to that, but I would have said that it was about delegitimizing points of view that I find abhorrent or mm-hmm. incorrect. Humor, and if people are arguing that, well, like what Sacha Baron Cohen did recently, got people to speak out in favor of children of kindergartners with the gun, having their own guns. This is a way of delegitimizing the pro-gun by just making them look foolish. Yeah. So that's one part of it. As I say, so I'm back in New York. I'm meeting a lot of people. I'm meeting a lot of younger people who keep saying, okay, I was reading your work when I was a kid, and it actually helped change my mind. It helped me
sort of formulate
my own opinions. So maybe it goes a little deeper than I've given it credit for.
What brought you out here?
To New York?
To New York, yeah.
My life hit an iceberg, and I needed somewhere to land.
It's a good place to do that.
Yeah, I needed it. I've lived here a lot of my life previously, and I needed somewhere to reinvent my life.
It's an interesting mix of. There's a certain degree of anonymity to it, right? You can sort of go your own way. There's so many people here, right? You can just kind of disappear if you want to.
I'm trying not to do that.
Do you feel that that living in the city is having? It sounds like it's having an impact on your work, or at least the sort of conversations you're having around it.
Yeah, I don't think it's impacting the work directly. Yeah. I don't want to go too deep into this, but I've just been through kind of unexpected and massively traumatic life change, and when that hit, I thought about taking a break from the work. And then I decided that everything in my life was suddenly up in the air, and having the weekly deadline was still going to provide me with routine and stability. And so I decided that I was just going to keep plowing away at that. I don't know that being in the city has changed work. I think that I've just been going through a lot in my personal life, and it's been good to just keep doing the work and to keep trying to do good work. And honestly, when I finish a cartoon, I usually hate it, and I just can't even think about it. And then I'll go back and look at it and say, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. And I was going back and looking at the work I have done over the past 6 months in this incredibly difficult moment, and I was happy with it. I thought I've actually been doing decent work despite everything.
When you had the experience of putting the book together a few years ago, it was a pretty complete anthology. Did you learn anything? Were there any surprises for you about your work?
Well, that was actually okay. So I had a similar experience there. So You're talking about the Kickstarter. I had this idea that I thought...
I think that was right around the last time we
that
spoke.
I did just... Well, that was when IDW
Yeah.
had put out the second edition. But I realized that I was coming up on a 25-year anniversary of doing this work, and I realized that it was... You know, I have put out a bunch of compilations every couple of years, but it wasn't...
Floppies.
It wasn't, normal
Paperbacks,
trade paperbacks. But there was just all this stuff that wasn't organized, that wasn't, I realized basically that if I got hit by a truck, no one was ever going to be able to put this together in any coherent form. So I got this idea of putting out this giant 2-volume compilation of everything I had done. Now I can walk out and be hit by a truck. I'm very relieved by this. And at that moment, no publisher in the world was going to say, sure, let's put out $100 book for this obscure alt-weekly cartoonist. So I turned to Kickstarter, and we were successful beyond our wildest dreams on that. I worked with some people on that. We had to get all that put together. Like it was sort of an act of faith, because once you launch the Kickstarter, then people don't want to wait 2 years to get their product. We had to have a lot of that book written and laid out and organized and in whatever the design program was. It had to be ready to go. So I spent a year, and these people I worked with spent a year just doing all this basically on faith, just basically hoping that we were going to hit our mark with the Kickstarter, and happily we did, and it all worked out. And I spent a year going over, literally my life's work. And I had the same response, similar to what I was just saying a couple of moments ago, that I went back and looked at it. I kind of approached it with great trepidation. I thought I might have to burn everything to the ground and salt the earth and never look at it again. But it felt like good work. It felt like I hadn't been wasting my life, and that was a good way to come out of that process, rather than looking over and thinking, Jesus, this is all terrible.
I respect, or at least understand, why a publisher would be a little wary of that. Not only just because of the size of it, but because
it's a 15-pound book.
Yeah, but beyond that, beyond the sort of herniated discs, the fact that comedy doesn't always age well, and political comedy especially, doesn't always age well. Did you find that wasn't necessarily the case going back?
Well, I added a lot of liner notes to explain things that maybe didn't make sense if you didn't live through it.
Do you find, though, that your personal life does have an impact on it? I mean, it seems like you're pretty good at sort of keeping your work and your life separate.
Yeah, these feel like separate things to me.
I think we spoke about this a little bit the last time we talked. You do tend to insert yourself in there a bit. I mean, the Penguin is kind of an avatar for you.
Yeah, definitely. The parts of myself that I'm inserting into the cartoon are my
tattoo on your arm now.
Well, I have a tattoo of Sparky the Penguin that was a result of the Kickstarter, because we had to raise, I may not get these numbers exactly right, but we had to raise, I think, $80,000 to publish the book, and I thought maybe we would limp across the finish line, and I was not going to make any money myself. I was going to make sure the team got their money, but I was going to forego my own profit. We hit, if we just hit this, all I wanted to do was get the book published, so that was my expectation. So at some point I thought, I'll just put up this silly stretch goal. If we hit $250,000, I'll get a new tattoo, and I already had tattoos, so this wasn't completely ridiculous, but I did not think we were going to hit $250,000, but we closed out over 300,000, and so I got the tattoo. It would have seemed too lame not to.
I mean, obviously, when you're the author of the strip, so there's going to be a piece of you in every one that you do. Why is it necessary to sort of have this stand-in to sort of speak directly to the audience in that way?
Okay, so I think that is that was an early result of the format of the strip. The the artwork and a lot of the approach, a lot of it is based on mid-century advertising and the
clip art-y.
Clip art-y ish, and it has that voice, that sort of or it did have that voice. I mean, it has changed a lot, especially in the current moment, but it had this voice of, gosh, isn't everything wonderful, that sort of thing. So what I found was that I was kind of often writing in the double negative, in a way that I was sort of trying to say what I was really trying to say with these characters who were saying the exact opposite.
So being kind of ironic.
Yeah, but with the characters presenting their beliefs completely sincerely.
It is kind of almost a Colbert approach in a sense.
Right, exactly. And at a certain point, I just wanted a character who broke format and spoke direct and said directly what I was trying to say. And the penguin thing was kind of random. I'd always doodled penguins as a kid, as a budding cartoonist. And so I just kind of threw in this character who looked like he had wandered in from some completely different cartoon.
There have been gradual tonal shifts over the years, but it's interesting you say a lot of that went out the window with the current moment, which I suspect you mean largely sort of the Trump era.
Exactly.
Insofar as you can put a finger on it, obviously being right in the middle of it, what is the tonal shift in the strip that you've seen?
I may be too close to it to explain it exactly, but I feel like I don't have that, gosh, everything is, I feel like I don't have that generic Republican saying everything is great. I feel like there's more nuance to it right now. I mean, I have my guys in my MAGA hats who are saying, oh, yeah, this is great because we're going to own the libs and who cares about anything. Those characters are not saying everything is great because they support everything. They're saying everything is great because it pisses off the liberals, which is basically Trump's only guiding philosophy and his supporters' only guiding philosophy, as far as I can tell. And my sort of generic Republicans, I think in real life, generic Republicans are a lot more queasy about Trump than they were about, say, George W. Bush. And it just doesn't feel like accurate satire to have that tone anymore. I haven't really thought this through before, so I'm kind of making this up as I'm talking to you, but that's about the best I can come up with.
I think you touched on something really profound about the current moment. For example, let's contrast Donald Trump and Mitt Romney, right? Mitt Romney, who just seemed like a really sort of like peppy guy for all of his flaws. Donald Trump's main campaign slogan was "Make America Great Again," right? That's a huge shift. That's a acceptance that things have gotten really bad, so there's nothing to cheerlead for.
Although I will note that Reagan's saying was very similar. It had one more word. He did Let's make America great again or something.
But there's a difference, right? There's a difference in that approach. And I don't know. Again, like I was not really around for the first Reagan campaign, but it does feel that the approach is different.
Well, Reagan was famously presented himself as the sunny optimist.
Yeah, he was a cheerleader.
We were going for the shining city on the hill, whereas Trump is this apocalyptic, crazy person who is saying we're going to make America great again because it's a shithole. And I mean, if you recall his inauguration speech, it painted this portrait of this bleak dystopian America like something out of the one of those scenes in the future in the Terminator movies or something. That seemed to be his, because he is, I don't know. This man has access to more intelligence, in the information sense, not in the brain sense, but he has more intel than anyone in the world, and he gets his information from Fox and Friends, and he genuinely believes, I think, that ICE is keeping America safe from the scourge of MS-13, which is devastating America. I mean, it is like the drunken guy at the end of the bar who only watches Fox News, except he became president. I mean, Trump famously doesn't drink, but he has that mentality.
Yeah. I remember the phrase dry drunk being tossed around a lot when George W. Bush was in office. There was sort of a sense of that. I feel like having all the alcoholistic tendencies without being an alcoholic.
Yeah. It's probably, I don't know if I can talk about these things, but there are certainly rumors that Donald Trump partied heavily in different ways in the disco era. And I have noticed that every time he comes back from Mar-a-Lago, he's very peppy for a few days.
He does sniff a lot, doesn't he?
He does. I am just making an observation. I am not making any claims.
It would be so hard to get sued for saying something negative about Donald Trump at this point. We all sort of talk about how we have to sort of unplug. I've been a news junkie to some degree off and on, and I've started meditating and running and drinking like wheatgrass and all these things, and part of that is like trying to unplug for my own sanity from time to time.
I don't have the luxury. It's my job, and so it was bad during the campaign. It was crazy keeping up with it during the campaign.
But there was a sense, at least, that there might be a light at the end of that tunnel.
Maybe. I mean, I will tell you that one of my cartoonist friends I was talking with right before the election, and my friend said, well, obviously he's going to lose. Just go ahead and file something that assumes that he's going to lose. And I said, I am not going to make that assumption. And if you go back and look at the cartoon I did that week, it was this generic fill-in-the-blank cartoon. It was a choose-your-own-adventure cartoon, basically, that, the point of it being I did not know who was going to win or lose, but when I filed that cartoon. And I was obviously right to go that route because, as it turned out, and boy, gosh, wasn't that a terrible evening? I was up until 5 a.m, I think. I even though I understood it was possible that he might win, it still seemed utterly impossible that he had won.
I wasn't here during 9/11, but I suspect, this is probably going to be an awful analogy, but I suspect that in certain ways the day after the election was kind of as close as we've gotten since then, because there was just this Paul in this city walking around.
I was up in Connecticut then, but everyone I know says that, yeah, there was just sort of exactly. But, so I have been dealing with Trump, and especially once he was elected, and, that year was one of the hardest years as a writer that I've ever had. And then my personal life kind of underwent a negative change that I wasn't anticipating. So it has felt like the world has been on fire and my life has been exploding, and it's just like there's no respite.
You're not alone in that, and it's really it's hard to divorce those external forces. I mean, I find that in my life things tend to domino, and things tend to sort of cluster with negativity. I'll lose my job and then go through a breakup, and some of it's sort of self-fulfilling and some of it touches on one another. But I think part of what's made this living through this time so difficult for people is that they're, aside from like the Cortez election, like there have been very few bright spots, and there's very few things that really point to a possibility that things could get better. It just sort of feels like,
well, it has felt that way for this period of time. Now everyone is hoping that at least Democrats will regain some power in the midterm election, and the balance of power will shift somewhat.
The impact that the internet has had on us is so profound that things will never be the same. And I'm not saying they're always going to be bad, but they're never going to be quite what they were. I would
go larger than the internet. The impact that Trump has had on us means that things are never going to be the same. It's going to take a very long time, assuming that this country survives this, assuming the democracy survives this, and I think that there's even odds on that. It's going to take a very long time to recover from the damage that's been done. The judiciary is going to be stacked for decades. It's a very grim moment.
Do you feel that your job has become more important in this era?
No, I really don't. As I say, I feel like there's only so much to point out. Everyone sees what's going on. None of this is hard to understand, but I still believe in what I do. I mean, I compare it to a drop of water. Like any individual drop of water doesn't matter that much, but collectively can have a lot of impact.
The role to me is very clear. What impact you can have when a Democrat is in office is sort of like, again, pointing out the profound issues with these people, these figures.
And for instance, one thing I often pointed out was, getting back to the kill list and the drone, the extrajudicial assassination program, people would say, but, we trust Obama. This is fine. We believe in Obama. And I was saying, but you don't know who's going to have this power next. You don't know what this precedent that you're setting will lead to. We don't even hear about it anymore, but I assume that Donald Trump has continued this program.
I think you tweeted something about that and somebody responded that it's actually gotten worse, but things are so crazy that nobody
we're not
talks
even
about
paying
it.
attention. Think about this. Donald Trump is in charge of the drone assassination program. Like we could have shut that down during the Obama administration if people had been willing to challenge Obama on it. And I mean, people were, but you know what I mean? Like it could have stopped there. It could have ended there. We did not have to, collectively, this country did not have to set this precedent of this insane extrajudicial power for the executive and give it to Donald freaking Trump.
Yeah. Furel's pointing out these things about someone like Obama in an era in which it's clear, I assume, to 90% of people who read your strip that the president is a shitposting buffoon who is ruining the country. What kinds of positive impacts or what role can you play aside from, again, pointing out these things that are pretty clear to everybody who sees him?
Well, all I can say, you brought up the old line earlier about preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
I have said many times that if that's a bad thing, then why are churches full on Sunday morning? Like there is a role for preaching to the choir, even if that's all it is. I think that serves a purpose too.
Are you able to take a week off?
Well, basically no. I am actually going to go on vacation in a couple of weeks, and at this point I think I'm just going to run some reruns. I think I'm going to go, I've got a very deep archive at this point. I think I'm going to find some old generic cartoons and give myself a break. Previously I would always, get ahead on work, but the idea of getting ahead in this news cycle just seems ridiculous. Like I can't possibly know what's going to happen. I could try to get ahead on the work and we could be in the middle of some, I can't even see here's the problem. I'm sitting here trying to think of the absurd scenario that's more ridiculous than anything that might really happen, and I can't do it here because who the hell knows, but we could have
he hasn't kicked a dog yet.
He could go out in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot someone. Okay, it's just it's hard to do that, and I think I'm just going to cut myself slack for like the first time in 25 years and just run a couple of of older cartoons and take an actual vacation.
I can speak from firsthand knowledge that getting back to this conversation that you had with yourself when you were moving here and whether or not, you were going to take a break from the strip.
At a very transitional moment in my life.
And speaking as somebody, I did a comic site called the Daily Crosshatch for a number of years, and I started a job and we put the site on hiatus, and that was it.
Yeah, that was part of that thought process too. I thought that if I took off 3 months or 6 months, I wasn't sure I was getting my job back. And my job is really tenuous as it is. I still get a lot of income from print. Papers are dying.
But it's also just sort of hard to get back into the routine once you've been out of it for a little while.
Oh, yeah, that too. But I'm just saying I'm kind of holding on by my fingertips as it is, and I'm not sure that taking a bunch of time off I'm not sure I would have come back from that.
I talk to a lot of people who do daily and weekly strips, and a lot of them, like Bill Griffith is a good example of this, and he actually has since sort of fulfilled this in recent years, but there's this desire to do something like a little bit more long form or more sort of more cohesive narrative. Do you have the bug to do that?
I don't know if I have the bug. But I think about it, as I kind of keep alluding to, talking around, but I've been in this kind of awful moment in my life, and I decided at the beginning of the year very consciously that the main thing I was going to ask of myself was to continue the weekly strip, was to keep hitting my deadline. So I've been dealing with just a ton of crap, and I haven't really had a lot of extra bandwidth for any other projects or anything bigger. I may at some point do something autobiographical because this stuff I'm going through, most of the really important graphic novels have come from some sort of really interesting personal story, like Durf's thing about Dahmer or Alison Bechdel's book. And up to this moment, I didn't feel like I had that story, and now I kind of do. It's just a question of how to tell it without people getting hurt in the process, because it's a divorce situation. It would have a lot of. It's hard to know how much I can talk about without damaging people that I don't want to damage.
And let's be honest. I mean, if you were out of it, you would know that. You're not out of it yet.
Oh, nowhere near.
So you need distances.
I can't. I'm in the middle of this thing. I don't have any distance on it.
Is the strip still fun for you? Is it still enjoyable?
It's I don't know if it was ever fun. It's work, man. It is satisfying. It is still satisfying to do work that I'm proud of.
And I suspect that one of the things that doing that, the volume a few years ago has afforded you is ability to take stock in that and perhaps maybe not really take it for granted in ways that you might have in the past.
Right. And maybe to just sort of, like for a long time I would approach it every week completely anew, like it was something I had never done before, and I wasn't entirely sure I was going to be able to figure out how to do it this week. And that's partly a byproduct of just this kind of work where, I have the Penguin occasionally or whatever, but it's not like a daily strip with a set of characters who are just kind of interacting in the way that they always interact. Like, I feel like I'm reinventing it every week. I mean, I often end up in more or less the same place, but I think I've kind of finally reached a moment where I'm a little more, if I don't have something written in the middle of the week, I will still go out at night and hang out with friends and live my life. And I have just really, in this moment specifically, I have kind of decided to accept that I've been doing this for 27 years or so, and that I'm probably going to get something written by the end of the week.
But it doesn't feel like going through the motions?
It does not feel like going through the motions. It's just been a rough it's been a rough patch, and it's been hard to focus. So the news cycle aside, the work might stretch into the weekend sometimes in a way that it never would have before, just because I'll have days where my brain is just not working.
That consistency, having this thing that you have to come back to, that must be keeping you sane.
That and other things, but it's good to have, and I have an audience. I get quite a lot of feedback. I get quite a lot of it is one of the ways in which I'm rooted in the world at a moment when the ground beneath me just gave way.
There you go. That was Tom Tamar. Recorded that one a while back in my offices in Manhattan. Thanks to him for taking the time to do that. and for continuing his work on this modern world, which has been a rare, consistent light in a rough couple of political years. Thanks, Tim. Thanks to you guys as always for listening to the program. Apologies for skipping a week there. It's been a little bit crazy on my end. I was in Asia for 2 weeks. Just got back in New York City, slightly jet lagged, but excited to be working on the show once again. If you like the program, there are a number of ways to support us. You can rate and review us on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you happen to get your podcasts. If you've got any feedback, it's rylcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Tumblr. That's rylcast.tumblr.com. That is the first and best place to get all of your RIYL related information. Like us on Facebook, and that's about it for now. So stick around because we're going to be back in the very near future with another episode of RIYL.